start with, I want to thank Rabbi Yosef Bet Yosef for making available to us the exhibit that you see in that room. And then secondly, I want to thank Dr. Eden Nabi and Myokra Vladimir Muqaddas for preparing and setting up this exhibit for us in the museum here. And finally, I also want to thank the Assyrian American Association of San Jose for providing us with these delicious pastries and refreshments. Once you see the exhibit, I'm sure that you would like to take some souvenirs with you, and we have some for you that are fantastic. There is first this genocide brooch that is made of sterling silver and amber, and it's produced by Atra to commemorate the genocide of Assyrians, Pontic Greeks, and the Armenians. So there are 3 birds representing the 3 ethnic groups that experienced the genocide, and this is $50. Next, I want to introduce to you a book that is about this exhibit and how it came to be. A lot of very informative documentation here, and it's available for you for $25. Please help yourself. And so today it's my privilege to introduce to you Dr. Samir Johna. I have a 16-page resume on Dr. Johna that if I want to go through every page, it will take longer than this presentation. So I will only highlight a few points. Actually, Dr. Johna is so modest that he gave us only a few lines of information. And I was the one who asked for more because I wanted to introduce him to you properly. Dr. Samir Johna is an Assyrian from Iraq, and he's a tenured clinical professor of surgery from Loma Linda University School of Medicine in Loma Linda, California. He is also clinical professor of surgery at Bernard Tyson Kaiser Permanente School of Medicine in Pasadena, California. He has a Master of Academic Medicine from University of Southern California in Los Angeles. So I'm skipping all these pages and going next to let you know that he has received 16 professional honors and rewards. I will only mention 3 of them. He is Fellow of American College of Surgeons. He has received GME Award for leadership and passion in educating the next generations of surgeons. He has also received an Appreciation Award for humanitarian work from Ancient Church of the East in Los Angeles. He is involved in various humanitarian activities. I have 13 of them listed. Most of these are pro bono minor surgeries that he volunteers to perform when needed. He has numerous Assyrian presentations like this one today and various Assyrian national conventions. I will mention only 3 of them. He made a presentation that is titled From Warriors to Guardians, the Assyrians and their Role in the History of Medicine. Next one I will mention is the School of Edessa and Jondi Shapur, the roots of modern medical schools. Very valuable information here. The third one that I will mention is George M. Abuna, the history of a pioneer in transplant surgery. Dr. Johna is a person that is other directed. He's involved in so many humanitarian services. One of them is to fund, cook, and serve hot meals for the homeless. He has engaged in 12 such services. As you see, I'm just skipping pages here.
You asked for it, Dr. Rita.
I asked for it, yes. 26 academic presentations. And these are in the area of his field of specialization. And there are so many technical terms here that I can't even pronounce. I'm just letting you know there are 26 of them. He is a member of 11 professional associations. I will mention only 3 of them. He's director, board of directors for YES in UK. He is medical director of the Assyrian Aid Society of America. And he is the founder and the medical director of Assyrian Medical Society. He has published 73 research-based publications in the area of his specialization. Last but not least, he is very active in the Assyrian media. I will only mention 3 posts that he has made. The first one, both of these that I mentioned are in, he did that in 2021, very relevant posts. The first one was done on Assyria Today Network. The topic is COVID Crisis Update. The second one, he posted it in Hakiana Aturaya, vaccine or no vaccine. And then the last one that I'll mention is he posted it in Today Network, and it's the legacy of Bakht Ishu family in the history of medicine. Let's give a hand to Dr. Samir Johna.
Really, it's an honor and it's a privilege to stand behind this podium in your presence. This is overwhelming, to say the least, because we are all here to serve one thing, and I'm going to allude to it. I hope that each and everyone here is as excited as I am when it comes to talk about this topic in particular. But before we start, I would like to thank Dr. Ishaya. Actually, she's so kind, and to the point I thought she was introducing somebody else. And I also like to thank Dr. Ida Nabi, because she invited me here. She's back to Boston, could not be present here today. I extend my thanks to the Assyrian American Association of San Jose leadership, Firas and Rochelle. Thank you very much for your kindness and for your generosity. I'd also like to thank AGN. I got to make sure it's AGN for their technical support. But I'd also like to thank each and every one of you who actually participated in organizing, executing, and even attending this event. You know, it takes a lot. And I know that while most of you are local, there are people that came really from far away, from even out of state. And I thank you for that, because it's such a wonderful thing to do. And Manny, thank you Amo, thank you. All the way from East Coast. That's great. Ambassador, thank you too, and everybody else. So thank you all for being here. How do we start about this topic? When we all gather here, we're simply commemorating one of our own, Dr. Joseph David Joseph, who became an established physician in his own right at the turn of the last century. The history of Assyrian medicine, the chain of Assyrian medicine, and that is extremely important. Finally, I would like to thank actually the Sunnyvale Heritage Foundation and Museum, Joseph, his family, and we, the Assyrians, another home on their premises. This will not be forgotten. In preparing this talk, I thought it was very fitting to go back as far as the Assyrian history went. And for that reason, I'm going to touch upon all the important milestones in the chain of Assyrian medicine, starting from ancient times, going through early Christian era. Hi, Doc. Going through the Islamic control, specifically under the Abbasid dynasty of Baghdad, and finally to the Assyrian medical renaissance that started in northwestern Iran in the second half of the 19th century, to which Dr. Joseph belongs. And then I'll touch upon a little of Assyrian folk medicine, some of which is still practiced today. Now, with that framework in mind, and like Black Eyed Peas says, let's get it started. Let's get it started. So, there we go. This is the ancient times. Medicine was fairly advanced in ancient Assyria. How do we know that? There are actually thousands and more than 800 complete medical texts that are written in cuneiform on clay tablets. There were about 40,000 clay tablets that was recovered from the library of the famous Assyrian king Ashurbanipal from Nineveh, most of which are actually preserved now in the British Museum. They called the physician at that time Asu. We call him Asya now. Not a lot of difference. They have another degree, if you will, is Galabo, which describes a surgeon and a barber. It's interesting, actually, how this combination worked throughout Middle Ages. I mean, in the 1600s in Britain, the company of surgeons joined the company of barbers, and therefore the company of barbers and surgeons. And it took 200 years for the surgeon to realize they have a little bit more brains than barbers, so they decided to split it in the 1800s, and that's when the Royal College of Surgeons was established in England. One of the very eminent surgeons in Babylon, his name was Urlugladin. He practiced medicine 2300 before Christ. And his logo was two intertwined knives. It's preserved in one of the museums. I want you to pay attention to this piece here that was recovered in Assyria. This is actually a liver of a sheep. That's the right lobe, left lobe, and this is the gallbladder. It comes from Assyria. Now it tells me something. The Assyrian doctor, even though they did not dissect human beings, but dissected animals, and they used that information inferentially to be applied on humans. This is the beginning of what we call today comparative anatomy. Because you look at anatomy of something and then you try to imply that and see if it's close to humans, and you base your decisions on that. Again, if you look at what they had at that time, this is a picture of instruments they used at that time. They made their own instruments to be able to practice medicine. Most of this stuff we still have today. They had tubes to deliver ointments into the eyes. Imagine, into the eyes. Not big organs, eyes. Into the ears. They also used instrumentation for bladder. We call it today Foley catheter. They had it. Obviously, it's not elastic, but it was different material, but they have it. Or they had it at that time. They had spetulas, which is equivalent to the forceps that we use for deliveries nowadays. They had it at that time. They had needles, they had sutures, they had even screws, and they had wood that used for setting bones and everything else. Yes, it's not as advanced as it is today, but at least they have the basic elements that they were able to use. And if you look at the documented procedures, It's amazing. Caesarean section, skull refining. Imagine, skull refining of the bone. They had also bowel obstruction. They managed it. Eye surgery as early as 3500 before Christ. They did many other things. Nasogastric tube, they installed stuff into the stomach, they did incision and drainage, and even drainage of empyema, which is a pus, an abscess, but it's in the thoracic cavity between the pleura and between the chest wall. I mean, you're talking about thousands of years ago. We still talk about these procedures, we still perform these procedures, albeit with a different technology, a little bit more advanced technology. You all know this. This is of Code of Hammurabi. Out ile babu khubabi. Code of Hammurabi has a lot to do with the medical practice. While the medical profession was very lucrative at that time, the doctors were held in a very high status, almost like gods, and they were paid very well. But they were also punished very harshly if something goes wrong. This is an example of how they were compensated. If you take your knife and you make a cut into somebody's drain pus, or do whatever you do, or you put a hole into the naqabti, which is the eye, and the patient recovers and you save his life, you get 10 shekels of silver. If you were a free man, if you're a villain, you take only 5. That was good. This can make a very good living for you. However, if you fail, if the patient dies, they cut your arm, they cut your hand. That is a very harsh punishment. So I learned 2 things from this slide. Number 1, Hammurabi was a troublemaker because he's the root of all medical litigations that we doctors suffer from today. May the Lord forgive him. More than this I cannot say. And the second thing I learned, that there is a reason why surgery was relatively more advanced in ancient Egypt compared to Assyria, because they did not have such a harsh punishment for failing of treatment. Now we're going to go to the Assyrian medicine during the era of early Christianity. With the fall of the Assyrian Empire, everything fell apart. Everything fell apart. You know, when there is a political turmoil, a loss of control, everything else is tied to it. And we did not hear from the Assyrians for almost 6 centuries. But with the rise of Christianity, Assyrians came to the front again. This time not as a warrior, but a people patrons of science and knowledge and medicine. We adopted Christianity as 32 AD. And if any one of you have read the book of the Ecclesiastical History of the Church by Eusebius that was written in the 3rd century, you'll find a very unique story. Some consider it a legend about one of the Assyrian kings with the name of Abgar-ukama. Khachakuma, that's his name, is Abgar-ukama. He was the king of one of the Assyrian municipalities with the name of Esro'in, which is in southeast Turkey today, with the capital of Edessa. He heard about the miracles of the Lord, so he sent him a letter, and there's a copy of that letter into that book that says, I believe in you, I've heard about all the, what the Jews are doing to you, so I invite you to come here, live in peace in my kingdom, even though it's small, and cure me of my illness. He had leprosy at that time. And the Lord responded back to him, saying that the mission that his father sent him is not complete. Once he's complete and ascend to heaven, then he'll send one of his disciples to cure him and the city and convert them into Christianity. In fact, that happened because, according to the history, that it was Apostle Thomas that sent one of his disciples with the name of Edde to the city of Edessa and converted the city to Christianity, and he cured the king at that time. We know the difference between apostle and disciple, right? I want to make sure everybody understands that. There's also degrees in the church that people understand that. So, you may ask, why the Assyrians? Why didn't I take the Persians? Why didn't I take the Greeks? There is a reason for it. There are actually 4 reasons. Number 1 is the location of Assyria. Even though we lost political power and we lost governance, but we still lived in the land, and it was central in 4 other civilizations that were all alive. You have Greeks to the north, you have Romans to the west, you have Persians to the east, and you have Egyptians to the south. This interchange of intellectual activity enhances the inquisitive soul, and enhances also development of science and knowledge. That was reason number one. Reason number two, when we adopted Christianity, we did not have a book in our own vernacular. It was, some of it was in Hebrew, most of it was in Greek. So our people needed a copy in their own language. So they applied themselves diligently to learn Greek so that they can translate the book. And in fact, they did. And they did a very good job. One of the best original holy books is actually in Surat. It's called Peshitta, and Peshitta, which means the simplified version, that even now scholars refer to it because it was very well done. What happened is, as a by-side result of that, they also came across a lot of Greek philosophy, science, medicine, literature that was so close to perish, was it not for them, that they translated it into Syriac. And after several years, they start translating it into other languages such as Arabic. We'll talk about that a little bit later. So they were responsible for preserving the knowledge, not only preserving it, but building upon it. And that's the second reason. The third reason, establishment of two schools. One of them is in Edessa, which is in southeast Turkey today, and the other one is Jindi Shapur, southwest Iran, close to the city of Susa. There is some time gap between them because initially the original school was actually in Saibin, which is a little bit east of Edessa. But when Persians took over that area, the scholars didn't like Persia and their rules. They moved west and started the school in Edessa. But when our church, during the Ephesus congregation 431, our actually patriarch, his name was Nestorius. He was in disagreement with the main theological doctrine of the main church. And that's why we all got excommunicated, and they called us Nestorians in reference to the Patriarch Nestorius. In fact, Patriarch Nestorius was captured. He was sent to exile in Egypt based on conspiring with Cyril. He was actually the bishop of Egypt, Alexandria. He was exiled and he died there. So they took everything we have, including the school of Edessa. And those people actually end up leaving the area, and they moved west because they were under the Romans. Now they moved west to territory that was under the Persian control that welcomed all these scientists, all these doctors, all these people. And they went back and established the school of Jindi Shapur, which became actually one of the top universities in the world at that time. I've read so much about that place, and the students would come from everywhere, from India, from the Middle East, even from Europe, to go and study there. Teaching was in Syriac, 100%, even though some of the classes were given in different languages, and became the source that fed the entire area with physicians. Now, was it a school of physicians or theology? No, it was a theology, but they taught medicine in parallel with theology, and that's why many of the pastors and, apostles and everything else, actually, I mean, not apostles, but disciples and everything else, they were not only people of theology and religion, they were also doctors. And these two schools, they are considered the roots of modern medical school. That's my own publication. That's my own conclusion. Because I went back in history, I did not find any model that incorporates classes and teaching medicine, and at the same time they have on premise a place where they keep the patients. The first time that was built was actually in Edessa. And there is some reports showing that their hospital were as big as 800 beds. Before that, the doctor would go from place to place, visit patients in their homes, and have students with them, what we call it the apprenticeship model. That was changed in Edessa to where they have now actually classes and they have teaching hospital. And eventually, when they went down to Jindi Shapur, they were so advanced, they had floors for internal medicine. They had surgical floors. They had even floors for mental illnesses. At that time, they had floors for mental illness. They have pharmacy. They have a lot of things. For that time, they held conferences, thank you, scientific conferences, and they took record of all those conferences. And they were actually very much supported by the kings of Persia at that time. And the fourth reason, before I forget, so we talked about location, we talked about adopting Christianity and translation. And we talked about these great two schools. And final thing is when Islam came and took over. You know, Islam has a problem with our theology. Because if you look at the Quran, I don't know how many of you have read Quran. I've read it in different languages. And I know it has 114 surah, which is 114 chapters, if you will. There is a surah or a chapter, and it's number 112 out of the total 114. It's very short. It's 4 sentences. But it's proves to be lethal to Christians and anybody who's not Muslim. Why? Because it says, قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدْ لَمْ يَلِدْ وَلَمْ يُولَدْ وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ كُفُوًا أَحَدٌ, which means God did not, he was never begotten, and he did not beget any offspring. Which means they refuse to believe that Jesus is Son of God. And that's enough for you to be condemned. Now, why did they have better terms with the Nestorians? Because we're a little bit different in theology. There's, the nature of Trinity in Nestorians is a little bit different. At least at the time of Nestorians, our church believed that when Jesus was conceived, he was conceived as a man, he was born as a man, and he stayed as a man until he got baptized in Jordan River. That's the time where God went down and dwelled in his body. And he stayed in his body during the time where he was doing all these miracles until he was crucified on the cross. And God left his body before he died. That's our belief, and Muslims thought that was not very much different than what they believe in. And that's why they did not hurt us, and that's why they left us enjoy all the privileges we had. In fact, their position became so high during the Islamic reign to where they were running. In the background, they were running the whole Islamic nation. I'll give you examples. Syriac remained the official language of the Islamic Empire during the time of Prophet Muhammad, during the 4 caliphs, and part of the Umayyad dynasty. It was Abdul Malik ibn Marwan, one of the caliphs, the Umayyad caliphs. He transferred the official language of the state from Syriac to Arabic. Before that, it was called Syriac. That was how much influential we were. And come forward, when the Abbasid came to the power and they established their capital in Baghdad, they started draining the school of Jandi Shapur because they know how what a great institution it was. In fact, most of the doctors that took care of Prophet Muhammad were graduates of Jandi Shapur. So they ended up draining him until eventually it closed because everybody now is in Baghdad, the capital of the Abbasid period. Now, this is a genealogy of one of the families. If you want to talk about the roles of Assyrians in history of medicine during the Abbasid dynasty, I'm going to need 2 days to finish. There is so much to talk about. But I'm going to choose one family and one person to represent, just like Dr. Ishaya did. 3 things. I'm going to choose one family and one doctor to talk about their contributions. This is the family of Bakhtisha. They were the chief physicians of the royal Abbasid dynasty for over 300 years. Father to son to nephew, father to son. It never left their house. You start from here, I don't know exact date here, but Jibra'il the first, this was, you can see the years here. And they stayed all the way to the 12th century. They were taking care of the royal family. No Christian can go to Mecca, but the Abbasid Caliph would take his Nestorian physician with him, even though there was a huge challenging to that. And if you read a very nice book about, it's by Elgwood, where I took this from, he describes how the people around the Caliph told him, you cannot take a Christian to Mecca. He said, well, the entire fortune of Islam is relied on me, and I am relying on him completely. Yes, he comes with me. That's how much trust he had in them. And of course, after the Abbasid dynasty fell, and Baghdad were under control of Mongol and Genghis Khan and Timur-Lenk and Holako and all these people, we suffered. We kind of went with them. And everything went downhill from there until the time of Renaissance. This is the person I want to talk about, Hanin ibn Ishaq, or Hunayn ibn Ishaq, or they call him Hanan bar Ishaq. This gentleman was known to Europeans by the name of Johna. It's the year he was born, and this year he's died. It's a short lifespan, it's not long, but the amount of work this man done is beyond belief. He was born in Hira, which is the Najaf of today, close to Karbala, His dad was a pharmacist or druggist at that time. And oftentimes, when you read about him, they say Arabic medicine, Islamic medicine. It has nothing to do with Arabs, nothing to do with Muslim. He's a Christian historian. And I'm not trying to be racist here, but the truth is, the common belief in the Middle East that we Christians are a foreign body implanted into that area by the Westerners and by the imperialism, whatever. No, we want to prove to them we exist in that land before you guys existed. And the only way to do it is this way, to go back to the roots of facts about those areas. He did not speak Arabic until he was in his 20s. How could you be an Arab, born in an Arab family, living in an Arab neighborhood, and you can't speak Arabic? In fact, he had to go to Jundi Shapur, try to become a doctor there, under Ibn Masawayh, which was in control of Jundi Shapur at that time. But he was so inquisitive. He really pissed his master off. He just couldn't answer all his questions, so he kicked him out. Go back to Hira, do exchange money, do whatever. You don't belong to medicine. He didn't give up. He went to Turkey at that time. I mean, today's Turkey at that time was part of the Roman Empire. And he dedicated himself to learn Greek. And he was so good at it that he started translating all the ancient works. In fact, he retranslated some of the works that our own people have translated because he thought they were not good enough. And we have a little problem. This is Arabic is required. He doesn't speak Arabic. So he went to Basra. And he learned under Khalid Ahmed al-Farahidi. He's a very well-known philosopher, Arabic philosopher, who taught him Arabic. But he becomes so good at it, so now he's translating all the Greeks into Syriac, and then he started translating into Arabic, which drew the attention of the Bakhtisha family. And they got him into the circle, and then Khalifa al-Ma'mun decided that he's going to put him in charge of Bayt al-Hikmah, or House of Wisdom, or Bayt al-Khimtha. That was the biggest scientific institution in Baghdad at that time. His work was so good. For every book he translates, he will get its weight in gold. That's how much he was actually rewarded. Let's look at some of his actually work. Translations. He translated 95 books of Galen from Greek into Syriac. He translated 39 books of Galen from Greek into Arabic. 6 Syriac, 30 book that was translated by his pupils, which he did not like. He redone them all. And then you go back also 50 Syriac that was translated by his predecessors, which he did not like. He revisited and retranslated all of them again. During his death in 873, he was actually working on the Galen's De Constitutione Artis Medicae, which is one of the very famous books of that time. If you look at original works, he himself has over 100 books that are originally written by him. He was known in Europe because of his book, which is the Ars Parve Galeni. It was translated into Latin. And in the Middle East and East, he was known by his books on questions on medicine and ophthalmology. Here are the topics he wrote about, almost everything. From medical to life to philosophy to religion to politics to everything. He wrote about everything. A very widely prolific gentleman. Okay, let's talk about folk medicine. A little bit about folk medicine. Folk medicine is not something new. It goes back to the time of the ancient Assyrian Empire. It's actually, you find in the cuneiform tablets as well, talking about folk medicine. A lot of plants, over 1,300 terms for drugs that originated from more than 340 plants. They were all classified, mentioned down, and written in details on the clay tablets at that time. Now look what they use. They use everything from herbs to trees to bushes, spices, grasses, all the way to pomegranate and figs and onions and stuff that, yeah, they used everything. They used everything for medical reasons. And I want you to take a look at these two. This is actually one of the pieces that shows the use of herbal medicine written in Lishana Sasaya and Ktivta Saseta, which is a cuneiform. So it's an old, folk medicine is old, it's not new. Look at this one. It's actually describing the use of the cocaine for recreation, not for medicine. Go Assyrian, go. They knew how to live. They knew how to live even then, man. I mean, it's like several thousand years now, we're talking about whether we should legalize cocaine or not legalize cocaine, but they used it at that time. Here are some of the practices that we still have today. You all seen that mothers, lactating mothers, putting some of their milk from the breast into the eyes of the babies. And there's actually a scientific explanation for it. Mom's milk contains all the antibodies that the mom has, and it has the ability to deal with certain infections. We used what? Warm boiled onion or dough and cellulitis to bring it to a head. I still remember it. One time my uncle, my only uncle I have, who was very sarcastic, he goes to the medical unit and says, "Sing, Amma, you know what I'm talking about." And he has cellulitis on the foot, and the doctor there said, "Why don't you hot an onion and put on it?" And he goes, "Doc, shall I just have a little lettuce and tomato and make salad?" He was a very sarcastic guy, but warm lime tea for abdominal cramps. We still do that today. We still do it. Sugar, water for jaundice. And again, there is an explanation for it. We still use it medically because it stimulates the hepatocytes to break down to improve its function to break down with the bilirubin. So there is scientific explanation for some of them. Of course, at that time, they didn't know what was the scientific explanation, but at least they found out by experience that it works. We have mastic for gases, God help us. And then they use grape water for baby cramps. It's still actually, even here in the United States, people use that. This was traced back all the way to the ancient times.
Is mastic data?
Yeah. يداري له data, يداري له عرق, يداري له كل Yeah, they use that. Now we're going to come to the age of the Renaissance, and that is actually, that took place with the arrival of the American missionaries into northwestern Iran, into Urmia specifically. And you cannot talk about that area without referring to Dr. Joseph Cochrane. The Presbyterian mission made it to Iran, to the Nestorians in 1835. Of course, at that time, it was not a Presbyterian mission. There was the American Commission of Foreign Missions. It was not until 1880s where it had to split because of disagreement of what should be the position of the church on slavery in America. So they have to split. The old system took care of Hakkari, and the Presbyterian took control of Iran and northwestern Iran. First school they built was in 1835. And first press, 1844, which is actually a huge achievement because that's the way they were able to publish whatever they wanted to enhance the education in that part of the world. Joseph Cochrane was born in Iran among his parents who are Presbyterian missionaries. And at one point he had to go back to America to complete his education, everything else. But his mom, even after his dad died, his mom was pushing him hard to go back to Iran because they thought, this is our house, this is our home. We're here to serve Word of God. So eventually he decided to go back. He studied pharmacy and dentistry so that he can help the missionaries because they didn't have dentists at that time. He completed one year of eye training, and then 1878 he was appointed as a missionary to the Nestorians in Urmia. And he's a milestone in terms of medical education because he started the renaissance of Assyrian medicine in Iran. To his goes the credit of building the first modern medical school in Iran, which is the Westminster Medical School. His work started in 1879. In 1 year, he treated almost 13,000 patients. And he was a very busy man. Yeah. Of course, we may not have 13,000 Assyrians there, but he took care of everybody that was living into the area. He performed successful operations, big ones, like amputation was big for that time, gunshot wounds, and many other ailments in addition to the medical illnesses. Then comes the medical school in Urmia, or Persia, which is the Westminster College, 1880 and 1915. I want to break here and let everybody know that not everybody went through this medical school. For Assyrians who learned into the Presbyterian missionaries and got higher degrees, if they wanted to complete the medicine, they had two paths. One path is try to get into this school, which is Westminster, and the other one just pack your stuff and go across the ocean and try to find your education there. So we're going to depict both of them here. So one of the very first students of this school, that was established in 1880, and it continued to work until 1915, World War I. That was the time when it stopped working. During this period, there were 24 doctors that graduated from school. First one was Ushana Badal. He was the first student, first doctor, and this is the school. In all time, this is the school nowadays. It's still standing there in the University of Urmia, in tribute to the services that the Presbyterians have provided to that part of the world. And this is the diploma of Ushana Badal. Unfortunately, Dr. Cochrane died at a very young age, in his 50s, because of typhoid fever. And the person who followed him, leading the school, was Ushana Badal. And then comes the other path, where you have to pack your stuff and come to the West and try to educate and become a doctor. One of them is actually our subject of today, Dr. Joseph David Joseph. Dr. Joseph was convinced by the missionaries to come to America and try to study dentistry, but his heart was not there. How do I know that? Because I read his journal. He always wanted to be a physician, but he thought it was a window of opportunity. He came here, and after 1 year, he decided he's going to switch back to his passion and do medicine. He was trained at the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century. I believe he arrived in 1892, 90, and he graduated by 93, 94. It was hard to decipher the entries at that time, but that's when he graduated and went back. So he studied medicine, and there was a lot of difficulties. Cultural change, change. It's a culture shock when you come from that part of the world to this part of the world. Cost, and even difficulties with language. He spoke how hard it was for him when he sat for the first test trying to pass all these things. It was extremely hard, but he did it. He's a doggedy-dog man, and he did it. He finished all of that. So most students at that time had to find a job by which they can support themselves, although Dr. Joseph found some help among fellow missionaries and their relatives, and also during when he was not doing academic classes, he used to give lectures about the Persian culture and what have you, trying to gain some extra income that will help him support his studies. He even worked in general labor. He didn't do well. He didn't do well in general labor because that's not what he's geared to do. Now, I got this from Ancestry.com. It's amazing how much you can find on Ancestry.com. But he finished University of Minnesota in 1892 until 1894. That's the time when he finished. I picked up the phone and I called University of Minnesota and I spoke to some person there and I said, can you help me get some information about one of your graduates? He goes, sure. What year did he graduate? I said 1894. There was a silence for about 30 seconds. And then she said, well, I'm going to have to refer you to somebody else. And I'm still waiting for that call back. It's been like 4 months. That's what happened. He finished internship training. I believe he was part of it in New York, only 8 months. So he went back to Iran with a diploma, with some tools, few medications, and an Irish wife. They went there, back to where he belongs to the Qarajalu area, and he was really meaning to stay there. He built a nice house and everything else, and he started developing practice. But for some reason, the weather did not go well in favor of his wife, and he had to actually decide to come back to America. He had very successful practice in Urmia among the Kurds and among the Persians, even our fellow Assyrians and Armenians. His journal entries, which I read, thanks to Vladi, thank you very much for that. They're extremely descriptive when it comes to what kind of living doctors lived there. And they made very good living by serving even politically connected, whether they are Muslims or otherwise. But again, he had to leave because of the family situation. He left his lucrative practice because of his wife's poor health. But that thing followed him even in the U.S., as we mentioned a little bit. This is actually some tags from the jars that he had. And I tried to read this. It's not easy, but it says, bullet out of tibia of Kurt Pashu, son of Shibli, tribe of Nomadi, after 1 year operation performed by me. Yeah, at Salamis, August 6, 1998. And I'm not very good at deciphering old Sanskrit, but I'm able to read it. Teeth and alveoli, part of something, case of Kurdish boy, of Chaya, Salamis, saved by operation, June of 1899. This is still stuck on the jars that are present from that time. Interesting. Again, you look at, he has 8 kids, 2 of them died at a very young age, the first and the third, and the rest of them lived a decent life. I have no contact with the family members right now, so I don't know much about them, but he decided to come back to the U.S. and to live in the West specifically. He started the Persian carpet business while he was in New York. It didn't go well. It didn't really kick off the ground. He bought a ranch and started practice in Colorado, but again, for some reason, he got sick this time. And he lost the hair of all his body, and he thought he cannot be presentable to patients looking this way. So he decided he was going to quit there. He came to California. As he's trying to get licensed, he started a chicken business, ranching. He bought a ranch and started raising chicken. That didn't go well because a lot of illnesses, so he switched to turkeys. And that did well. And then he thought about getting licensed in New Mexico because it was fairly easy. You pay $20 and then you sit for an interview and they'll give you a license. In fact, he got it, but he thought about the demographics of the area and said, no, I don't think it's for me. And he stayed in California, but for some reason he gave up on trying to get California license. California has been terrible ever since. I'm just saying, for those of you who wants to leave. Yeah. So, he stayed in the ranching business. His entry stopped by 1919, and there was a lot that he mentioned about World War I and how Assyrians suffered during that time, which is not a subject of this topic. But he stopped writing in 1919. 1922, he died in a tragic accident. I believe he was only 54, something like that. Very tragic. So his story stops here. And قبل انشلام وخبو إقارة مني. Thank you very much. I'm ready to answer any question if you have. Thank you.
These exhibitions are made possible by people who preserved old papers, pictures, documents from their fathers and great-grandfathers. All of you, you are survivors of a Holocaust. Your ancestors had to go through a great hardship to come to this country, to be able for us to survive today. So please, I encourage you to keep the papers, the pictures, all documents of your ancestors. Don't throw them away. And if you know of a family that you see that they have kept such documents, please encourage them to bring them to us, to give them to the Assyrian American Association of San Jose, to Assyrian Foundation of America. And we will preserve them and we will make them part of our history. Thank you very much for coming, and there are still books and brooches for you to see, and some CDs if you want to take as a souvenir with you. Thank you.
Fellow Assyrians and friends of Assyrians. My name is Julian Mogadassi. Starting Sunday, April 3rd, there will be an exhibit about modern Assyrians that runs through June 5th at the Sunnyvale Heritage Park Museum. From Qarajalu to Santa Clara, an Assyrian family's multiple Atlantic crossings in search of a home at the turn of a century. The third lecture will be on Sunday, May 15th at 1 p.m. It is titled Sources and Selected Details of the Life of Dr. Joseph D. Joseph, a son of Qarajalu, a man of Santa Clara County, by Vladimir Mogadassi. As a special treat, the lecture on May 15th will be given in the Assyrian Neo-Aramaic language, similar to the one that Jesus spoke. The fourth lecture is on Sunday, June 5th at 1 p.m. It is titled Reflecting on the Old Country, the Assyrians of the Urmi Nation, by Dr. Nicholas Al-Jiadu. There will also be a tea and coffee reception on all 4 Sundays. The website is Qarajalu to santaclara.com, and it will be available after April 3rd. All lectures and exhibit will be available at the Sunnyvale Heritage Park Museum. Parking is free at the museum, and admission is also free. The exhibit starts on Sunday, April 3rd, and runs all the way to June 5th, 2022.